Today's lecture is called The African Quartet, and you shall see in a while why I've decided to call it that. So we're going to look at the African influence on the Parisian scene of the first two decades of the last century. And instead of just looking at the painters and sculptures, I'm going to try and give you as much of a holistic picture as possible. So as well as looking at the painters and sculptures, we'll also be looking at the collectors and dealers and patrons, just so you can get a wide-ranging view of the scene at that time. Okay, and there's going to be a bit of a difference in this lecture because it's going to be a mixture of the normal kind of lecture format, but I'm going to intersperse it with some readings. What I've done is I've actually written a short collection of writings, a mixture of prose and verse around this subject matter. So what I'll do, each kind of aspect that we'll be looking at will be preceded by either a piece of verse or a piece of prose. Okay, I'm going to start this one off with this one here. The African Quartet. It doesn't matter who was first, Vlaminck, Derain, Matisse or Picasso, from a bar in Argenteuil or a shop called Curio, a night at the Salon or through the Chocadero, they heralded the appreciation of African art. Because when we think of the African influence on European art, we tend to think first of all of Picasso and Matisse, but I think there's a kind of an African quartet. So there was the Vlaminck and Derain. So we start with Vlaminck and we go back to the piece I've just read, Argenteuil. Okay, the Vlaminck had been painting all day and it was quite hot. He finished and he went into a bistro in Argenteuil, and he's sitting there drinking, and on the wall he sees some sculpture, which was later recognized as two pieces from the Bangla people in the Ivory Coast and one from the Yoruba in Nigeria. Now, I just want to say something there before I move on. It's kind of, I can see why there's the pieces from the Ivory Coast, because that was a French colony. So I'd like to find out how the piece from the Yoruba people came to that bar, because the Yoruba, the main ethnicity in southwest Nigeria, and Nigeria was an English colony. So I'd like to kind of be interested to track down and find out how that particular piece came to be in that bar. Anyway, so the Vlaminck is in this bar, he's drinking, and he looks up and sees these sculpture, you know, and flips out and, you know, and says to the bar owner, you know, that he'd like them. And they came to an agreement, and the agreement was that if he bought a round of drinks for everyone in the bar, then he would be allowed to take the pieces away. And that's what he done. He bought a round of drinks for everyone, and ended up with these three pieces. Now, this all happened in this period, the 1906 period, 1905, 1906 period. So that's kind of the Vlaminck's kind of introduction to African art. Derain, his introduction was, he was known as a painter. He was one of the main figures in what was called the Fauvist movement, the Wild Ones. This is a term that was given to them, you know, because they like to use a lot of colour and such things, and it was said to be quite wild. So that's how we have the term Fauvist. Okay, so a friend of his had given him this mask by the Fang people, because the wife of the friend had said that these pieces of sculpture were horrific. She didn't want them in the house. And his friend, knowing that he was an artist, asked him if he wanted them, and Derain said yeah. So that's his kind of introduction to African art through this mask that was given him from the Fang people. The rest of it, as far as the curio shop is concerned, and the salon we'll come to in a minute with the next piece, but I'll just say something about the Trocadero before I show you some of the art. So the Trocadero was France's contribution to the ethnographic museum building. What happened is a kind of, as you know, in the 1860s, there was this massive or infamous conference in Berlin, where basically the European powers came along and chopped up the continent. And then what they've done in the latter part of the 19th century, they all started to build these museums to kind of display all this kind of, the artifacts of the colonized, a kind of showcase, the kind of showing off, saying like, these are people we've colonized, and these are some of the things that they produced. The quartet were amongst the 4 original people who kind of took these statues out of the kind of the ethnographic scenario and put them on the pedestal of art. And this is one reason why I really respect and admire these guys, because they gave due respect to these pieces of art. So you had ethnographic museums in Dresden, in Berlin, in Antwerp. The English one was inside the British Museum, and the French one was called the Trocadero. And from 1906, there was this kind of, I kind of think that there must have been this kind of almost kind of exodus every morning from Montmartre and Montparnasse of these kind of artists going in the direction of the Trocadero to kind of acquaint themselves with art from Africa. Now, as I mentioned, de Vlaminck had found these pieces in this bistro. One of them was a Yoruba, and I won't say so much about the Yoruba now because we're going to be looking at the Yoruba art next week, but let me show you some Baule art. I think this is some of the greatest sculpture that was ever produced. So look. And they've got this kind of motif of kind of almond eyes, often downcast, the long thin nose, the minuscule mouth. These are the motifs that you'll come to recognise with the Baule art. And as I say, the Baule are part of the Akan. So originally they were resident in Ghana, but there was a struggle to see who was going to be the next king, the next Asantehene. And due to this, the Baule left Ghana and migrated into the Ivory Coast, where they are now resident. But look at this art, it's beautiful. There's an elder there with a beard. Yeah, but that same motif, the long thin nose, the almond eyes, often downcast. Beautiful, beautiful. And some of their gold work. Okay, so that gives us some idea of the Baule art. So you can see why de Vlaminck was so insistent on having those pieces, and was quite happy to buy everyone in the bar a drink, because he managed to get these, you know, this kind of artwork. I mean, amazing. I would have done the same thing. If I had money in my pocket, I would have happily bought a round for everyone. Okay, lovely. Okay, let's carry on. Okay, the next piece is called The Legendary Rendezvous. One day, a Frenchman-born object, which is then showed to a Spanish man at the house of an American woman. They said that the Spanish man was entranced, engulfed by it, couldn't stop looking at it and touching it. I've heard that he went home and throughout the remainder of the night, sketched the object, falling asleep in the early hours of the morning. In 1906, Henry Matisse bought a Willy statue and showed it to Pablo Picasso at the house of Gertrude Stein. The legendary rendezvous of Africa, Matisse, and Picasso. Okay, so two of the great salons of the early part of the 20th century in Paris. One was held by Gertrude Stein, the writer, and the other one was, or one of the other ones was hosted by Helena Rubinstein, who was a cosmetics magnate, but also became one of the great collectors of African art. So what happened, Picasso had passed this curio shop, and we get the impression that he passed there quite a lot. And I guess he went in from time to time and bought something. But I don't think he'd ever bought any African art. But one day he passed by and saw this Willy statue and kind of just felt the need to buy it. Went in and purchased it and took it round to Gertrude Stein's house. And as I say, Picasso is kind of said to kind of flicked out, was amazed by it, and kind of for the whole of the night, you know, couldn't stop touching it and looking at it and such forth. And then went away, and that night is said to have gone home and sketched it and then fallen asleep in the early hours of the morning, kind of, yeah, just tired and elated and everything. So that was his first introduction to African art. And then from there, he started making the trips to the Trocadero to make himself more aware of other African art. Now the Willy, this is the statue that Matisse picked up. This is the Willy statue. Now the Willy come from the Congo, and it's quite good that this is the first kind of piece, the first famous piece of a sculpture amongst those artists, because when we think of art in the Congo, we tend to think of more people like the Koba and the Luba, the Mangbetu. So it's good to see the Willy people given a spotlight. So this was a piece that he bought in the curio shop and took to the salon. And then that same year, or sorry, the following year, he painted this piece, which is called Still Life with African Statuette, and you can see the little Willy figure there. So there's the actual statue, and then right next to it, it says 1906. So he bought this in 1906. Then the following year, he painted this piece, which is called Still Life with African Statuette. Okay. And now I'm just going to show you another piece, another Willy piece, which is in. Okay, here we go. Another Willy piece. This was a piece that was used in the healing process. Okay, so that gives you an idea of the Willy. As I say, when we talk about art from the Congo, especially of that period, we tend to focus on the other cultures and what they produced, but the Willy definitely deserve to be recognised. Okay, lovely. Okay. The next person we're going to look at is, when we speak about the art scene, we need to remember that kind of, just like in the Harlem Renaissance in America in the early part of the century, early part of the 20th century, it wasn't just African Americans that were involved in it. There was a lot of input from the Caribbean, especially where the literature and the journalism was concerned. And the same way they had that outside, what you might call that outside input in into that movement, in the Parisian movement, where there was that kind of growing awareness of African sculpture. It wasn't just the French artists. You have to remember, earlier on we mentioned, a minute ago I mentioned Helena Rubinstein, and we're going to talk about her again later. She was Polish. Modigliani was Italian. Giacometti was Swiss. And the person we're going to look at now was from Romania. So, Brancusi, he is said to have said that the two things that influenced his art was the art of his homeland, the traditional art of Romania, and African art. But I think that maybe his greatest influence was his kind of encouragement of another artist. And we're going to come to that in a minute, but I'm just going to read you this piece. Now, this piece, I've written it as from the viewpoint of a younger artist, an aspiring artist who likes to walk, and he knows that Brancusi likes to walk. You know, in his younger days, Brancusi was a shepherd, so he's up in the hills of Romania, wandering around with the sheep. When he left Romania and came to France, mostly the journey was made on foot. So this is a young person dreaming of taking a walk with Brancusi. So this is a walk with Brancusi. The aspiring artist, feeling confident, is going to see the acclaimed one. La da 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 dee dee. He walks from his homeland to France. Will he take a Sunday stroll with me? The young man is hopeful of taking a walk with Brancusi. Through the streets of Paris and along the Seine, talking of the Baga and the Bantu. Da, 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 dee. Cameroonian grasslands and the Congo forest. He's in happy consultation of taking a walk with Brancusi. To hear his impassioned talk of walking in the hills in his beloved Romania. La, da, 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 dee. Of the headrest and the ancestor, of wood and potential wonder. He awakes elated from his dream of taking a walk with Brancusi. Okay, so now we're going to go on to, I just now mentioned that maybe Brancusi's, as far as African art goes, maybe his greatest contribution of the awareness of it was his friendship with Modigliani, who we're going to talk about now. He was an artist who had come from Italy and had come to live in France, and they became neighbors and friends. And he was the one who encouraged, Brancusi was the one who encouraged Modigliani to gain an awareness of African art, and also encouraged him in sculpture. So we're going to look at that in a minute. I'm going to give you some pictorial evidence of that in a minute, but I'm just going to read you this piece. This is called A Talk with Modigliani. I met Modigliani the other day, slumped on an early morning bench in the Luxembourg Gardens, struggling to emerge from another night of excess. But when I mentioned the Baule, he shot up and stayed upright for the rest of the conversation. We spoke at length about their elegance in their sculpting, the recognizable motifs, those almond eyes, the long thin nose and minuscule mouth. We spoke of the carved doors and the golden pendants, but mainly we spoke of the sculpted visages, which could be entitled regal, meditative, or dignified. Take your pick. As the world wandered and rushed past us, we sat and spoke of art and beauty until it began to rain. So we went off to the Trocadero, and I reluctantly went back to my apartment. Okay, let me just show you the evidence of this. Okay. This is a piece that Modigliani sculptured, one of his first pieces, 1912, called Woman's Head. And as you can see where he's influenced by the Bangla art. You can see the almond eyes, the long thin nose, the minuscule mouth. So for me, you know, and I think this is a great piece of sculpture. And so for me, Brancusi is probably, as far as his contribution to the awareness of African art, I think his greatest input was his encouragement of Modigliani to sculpt and to make himself aware of African art. Okay, Modigliani. Okay, let's continue. Okay, this one is called The Kuba and the Bangwa. I've seen the Kuba cloth in the home of Henry Matisse, and I've seen the Bangwa statue in the abode of Helena Rubinstein. Okay, so the first one is obviously the famous artist Henry Matisse, and let me just show you. Okay, so this is a picture of him in his house, and these two pictures here are both Kuba cloth. Yeah, so that one there and that one there. So his African influence is actually all around him. Okay, and what I'm going to do is show you some of the Kuba cloth. Okay. Now, when I look at that, this here, I think it's not far, when you see that, it's not far to think of Matisse's Blue Dancer. But you can see how kind of this art came to influence Cubist painters. This all Kuba cloth from the Congo. Okay, and this is made from raffia cloth, which is made from a palm tree. Okay, so that just gives you an idea of that. And as I say, you can see there and there are the two pieces that you can see behind Matisse. Okay, so that's the first person mentioned in it. The other one is Helena Rubinstein, who we mentioned earlier, I said was a cosmetics magnate and one of the most famous collectors of African art. So I mentioned the Kuba, and the other people mentioned were the Bangwa. Now this piece here is probably the most famous of the Bangwa pieces of sculpture. There are people who come from Cameroon, and as you know, it was a German colony. The Germans lost all their colonies after the First World War, and Cameroon was partitioned. Half it became English, half it became French. Okay, now the jury is still out on who this figure is. She's normally called the Bangla Queen, but that's not the best description, because the Bangla were formed as chiefdoms, not as kingdoms. So queen wouldn't be the best way to describe her. Could she be a figure? Could she be a diviner, calling the ancestral spirit to come and help with the divination process? Could she be an earth priestess, giving thanks for the harvest? But general consensus seems to say that she was a mafwa, an important female figure, a king's sister, the chief's sister, or maybe the chief's wife. But you can see that she was in some kind of Thanksgiving mode because she's got an open mouth, which looks as if she's, you know, singing something. She's got a rattle there, and her knees are in that position. So it looks as if she is giving thanks, you know, kind of, it's a kind of a celebratory picture. This piece went all over the place, and Helena Rubinstein was one person who had this piece. And in 1990, it was sold. I think it was. I can't remember which of the great auction houses hosted it. But anyway, it was sold in 1990 for 3.4 million. In 1990, this piece was sold for 3.4 million. Okay, so known as the Bangla Queen. Okay, lovely. Okay. The Baule and the Luba. Let us remember two others, the Hungarian and the German, who also hosted the Baule and the Luba. I salute Daniel Henry Conwayler and pay respects to Joseph Brummer. Okay, so this is where we spoke about our collector, Helena Rubinstein, and these two were two of the early great dealers in African art. Joseph Brummer was from Hungary, had studied art in Budapest and in Munich, had come to Paris and for further study, and had studied under Rodin and under Matisse. But then he kind of left all that behind and just became a dealer, and in 1906 opened up a gallery in Paris. The other guy I mentioned was a German, Henry Weiler, and he was a Jewish, same as Modigliani, was of a Jewish ancestry, came from a banking family, but then kind of left that behind and just became this great patron and dealer in art. One of the first people to champion Cubism, and actually wrote about it as well. One of the great theorists of Cubism supported people like Braque and Picasso. And he was a man, kind of tenacious figure, really, when you think that after the First World War, or during the First World War, a lot of his artwork was confiscated and sold by the French government because he was German. And then in the Second World War, he had to leave Paris, you know, because he was Jewish. So, you know, this was a man who had kind of a lot of bad luck, but still became one of the greatest collectors of art and one of the greatest theorists, and one of the great patrons, you know, a lifelong friend of Picasso. And there's a famous portrait of him in Cubist style, which was done by Picasso. Yeah, you should check it out. It's the way that kind of Picasso, to kind of, you'll see it you'll see at the top of the picture, there's, you can just make out his hair, a tuft of hair and his mustache. And at the bottom of the picture, you can see his clasped hands. But check it out, portrait of him by Picasso. So as you see, I mean, it was a really like cosmopolitan scene. It wasn't just the French. I mean, there was people from all over Europe involved in this art. Okay, so moving on from there. Now we're going to, okay. This is called Serenity. Braque was a collector, and so was Epstein. Sculptures of Serenity, the visages from the shrine. Okay, as you know, Braque was one of the forerunners of Cubism, alongside Picasso. And Epstein was one of the preeminent sculptors, British sculptors, also of Jewish ancestry, and one of the great collectors of African art. And he's said to be alongside Helena Rubinstein and Paul Guilhem, who we shall come to later. He was one of the great collectors of the Fang art. And I'm going to show you some of the Fang art here. Okay, because it's nice to kind of, we say that kind of that these guys were influenced by African art, but it's actually good to actually pinpoint, you know, the actual cultures and art that they influenced them. So this is some of the art of the Fang, F-A-N-G. This shiny patina is due to the anointing with things such as palm oil. But when I think of the Fang, you know, they're kind of divided into subgroups. But the two subgroups I like is the Betsy. So this is, these are two sculptures by Betsy people. Kind of mystical there, aren't they? But these were Bieri figures, which were placed on top of containers where the ancestral relics were kept, the bones of the honoured ancestors, and these figures were placed on top of them. But I like the kind of mystical kind of otherworldly effect. Okay, so that's the Betsy, and let me just show you this. So this is an Umvai man, MVAI, another subgroup of the Fang. And so there's a picture of an actual man, and look at this. This is how they depict the, especially the hair. See it there? The Umvai. So there's the man there. See the three kind of crested, the hairstyle of three crests. And then the way they've depicted it there. So the people I showed you before, they're the Betsy, B-E-T-S-I. And this is the subgroup called the Umvai, M-V-A-I. And it seems as if everyone wanted a Fang sculpture. All of the great collectors, dealers, patrons, artists all seem to have either a Fang sculpture or a Fang mask. Remember I said earlier it was Duran who had been given a Fang mask. Okay, moving on. Okay, this is called Paul Guilhem. They shared a name and a love for African art. Ballad of the Mentor and the Mentee, Guilhem Apollinaire to Paul Guilhem. The older gave the younger that crucial start. Now they hold the collection of the younger in the Musée de l'Orangerie. Works from Sudan and Gabon, Liberia and Ivory Coast, such as the people that are called the we. Okay, Apollinaire was a famous poet associated with the Surrealist movement and the general cultural happenings in Paris. Now he mentored Paul Guilhem. Now Paul Guilhem was working in a luxury car dealership in Paris. And what used to happen, the dealership was sent rubber from Gabon for tires. And in these packages, there would often be artifacts, sculpture and masks from the area. Paul Guilhem would put these on showcase in the garage. Apollinaire was notified of this, and through this he became friendly with Guilhem, introduced him to all the artists, and it was actually Daniel Carnevale who actually bought the first piece that Guilhem had showcased in the garage, and that was basically the start of his kind of great contribution to the dissemination of African art, because he set up a gallery in 1914, and then from there works of his were invited to be showcased in various exhibitions in Paris, in Europe, and also in America. He became truly one of the great patrons as well as dealers in African art. Wrote books as well. Negaplastic, which is one of the first books focused on African art. He had input into that. So he's one of the great figures. Started off from, most of the other guys came from kind of middle and upper class backgrounds. He came from modest beginnings, as I say, began as a clerk in this garage, and then through these artifacts that were sent over from Gabon with the tires, kind of generated this love for African art in him. And as I say, he became one of the outstanding dealers and patrons. So that's Paul Galen. Okay, we go on. So next I want to show you this. Fernand Léger. Now, I get by in Spanish, but I have to admit that my French is non-existent. So if my pronunciation is off key, please forgive me. But Fernand Léger in the early 20s was asked to design a set for a production called The Creation of the World. And all the costumes and all the set was based on African art. So this is a piece that I've written about that. It's called, Where Did You Go to See Africa? Where did you go to, Fernand Léger? What inspired that magical set? Did you go to the Chocadero, the Kuro shops and flea markets, the galleries of Broma and Guilherme? Or maybe you sat listening outside an evening cafe to the stories unfurled by Blaise Sendars. Where did you go to see Africa? I'm looking at an image now, Fernand. I've never seen such an interaction of a set with the costumes, all coloured black, white, orange, red and yellow, celebrating geometry, the towering guardians and skyline masquerades, cubist and abstract, but always the imprint of Africa. You created a jamboree of colour, a theatrical wonder when you designed that set. I would have gone more than once to the production, whatever the content, it's just to see that inspired scenery and stage apparel. Did you win awards? You must have had the producers queuing at your door, requesting collaboration after seeing the set and costumes of the creation of the world. Okay. This one now we're going on to, as I say, there was this cosmopolitan input into the scene. And this one looks at Giacometti. This is called Ancestors. I love the photograph of you, Giacometti, of you in your studio and on your desk, a cotta reliquary, remembering their ancestors of Gabon and the Congo. Son of Annette and Giovanni, from Switzerland to France with Africa in your head, you and the statuary, remembering their ancestors of Gabon and the Congo. Grand Chaumerie Academy, place of study in Paris, time in Chocadero, mesmerized by effigy, remembering their ancestors of Gabon and the Congo. Salon de Toilerie, first showing of your work. You've traversed Africa, guided by geometry, remembering their ancestors of Gabon and the Congo. I'm just going to show you some of the work of the cotta and to show you the kind of reliquary figure that was on the desk of Giacometti. Okay, so these people, you can also find them in the Gabon and the Congo. Okay, so this is it. This is the kind of figure that was on the desk of Giacometti, the Swiss sculpture. Okay, I think I've got one other one here. Yeah. So they were made of a wood, and then they had this metal this metal that was tacked to them. Very kind of minimalist kind of style. Yeah. So this is the kotta. The people are called the kotta, and a reliquary figure. So just like the Fang Bieri figures, these are figures that were placed on the container that held the ancestral relics, the bones of the honoured ones who have gone on before us. Okay. Okay. This one here. My auntie and Giacometti. My favourite auntie would have been given one for sure. They were given as markers of respect to certain women, lauded for their culinary generosity and catering brilliance. These large spoons were presented by the chief with deep appreciation and received by the women with heartfelt gratitude. They claimed women paraded them and used them for community benefit. In 1927, resident in Paris, the Swiss sculptor Giacometti gave us Spoon Woman, like a homage to African womanhood. Working with wood and the abstract, he celebrated the women of the Dan who reside in Liberia and the Ivory Coast. Auntie Nella's pot was never empty. There'd always be something in it for you and I. With a big spoon, she ladled out rice and peas, or maybe soup. If Auntie was a Dan, she would have been the holder of a large sculpted spoon, because she fed all of those who stepped in through her front door. Okay, now I'm just going to show you a picture here of a spoon, the same spoon that I'm talking about. So this is a kind of spoon that was given to these women who had, you know, as I said, they were renowned for their catering brilliance and culinary generosity. And this was kind of recognized by the whole village, and the chief would present these spoons. Okay. And now I'm going to show you okay, so this is the one that Giacometti done in 1927. In 1927, this is what he sculpted. It's called Spoon Woman. So this is his kind of homage to African woman, to African womanhood, and specifically to the women, the Dan women, as I say, of Ivory Coast and Liberia. Okay. Now, I'm just going to finish with this piece here. Now, out of all the pieces that I've mentioned by these artists, this is the one that I would have in my flat. I would love to have this blown up. I'd love to have this blown up and have it in my flat, as large as it could be. I think it would be great as a mural. I would like to have it minimized and put it in a pendant for my daughter. I think it would make a great mural, but I would love to have it as large as I could, just taking up one wall of my flat. This is called Head of a Sleeping Woman, and this was painted by Picasso in 1907. And it makes sense to finish with Picasso because he's probably the most famous of the artists who are acquainted with. And he actually went through a period, you know, after his rosé period and his blue period. He had a period where we couldn't really call it a black period, because whereas with the other periods, they were called that because the dominance of a certain color. But these pieces that he done, black wasn't really the kind of the dominant color really. So I prefer to call it his African period. And I think this is the greatest piece. I think I think this is a masterpiece, Head of the Sleeping Woman. Okay. Okay, I hope this lecture has given you more insight into the cultures that actually influenced the artists, like rather than just saying, yeah, they were influenced by African art. Now you've been able to see that they were influenced by people like the Baule from the Ivory Coast, the Fang from Gabon, the Bangwa from Cameroon, and such forth. Rather than just this generic term, African art, it's good to be able to kind of actually pinpoint and specify the actual cultures that influence these artists. So thank you very much for attending. I hope that you'll attend the lecture next week, where we'll be looking at the sculpture of the Yoruba of Nigeria.